Welcome to the second season of the Creator Community. This is a brand new podcast offering from book publisher New Degree Press. I'm your host, John Saunders from Forward Advisory Solutions. The show is designed to celebrate, elevate, and showcase many of the incredible authors that have published their books with NDP. This year, NDP will cross over 1,000 published authors. In the show, we'll get to know the authors and their books, as well as give you a behind-the-scenes look at their journey. We'll find out what it takes to bring a book from an idea to being available wherever you buy books online. It's no easy task. Today I have with me Michael Dumlao, author of the Wisdom of Guncles. His book will be available at the end of August on Amazon and again, wherever you buy books online. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
You know, you have such an interesting background in corporate America and the work you've done, and obviously a very busy gentleman. It takes a lot of discipline and energy and effort to get a book out. I'd love for you to just share with our listeners, if you would, a little bit about your author journey.
So I would say my biggest aha moment in this entire journey was discovering that writing The Wisdom of Guncles was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with pieces made of water. So like the picture I thought I saw vividly in my mind kept shifting with each interview and insight. And it was incredibly challenging for sure. But with the rigor, discipline, and community that I found in the Creator Institute and New Degree Press, I ended up with something, okay, granted, very different from what I had set out to create, but it is so much more profound and meaningful in the end. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And I actually started it as an interviewee. So a friend and colleague who had gone through one of the prior cohorts had interviewed me to gather corporate best practices for her book. And I had just finished leading the rebrand of a Fortune 500. And I was concluding a decade of directing diversity and inclusion programs focused on recruiting and retaining LGBTQ and communities of color. After I answered her questions, I asked her how she found a publisher. And I told her that, frankly, it's been a dream of mine for a very, very long time to write a book, especially because I personally believe that as a gay, brown, Filipino immigrant who expresses gender creatively from boardrooms to military bases, that mine is a pretty unique voice and perspective. So she gave me the contact info for Professor Custa and made me promise to sign up for the class. And even though I had all these ideas and pitches in my laptop and in my head, I sat on those emails for months. It wasn't because I didn't think I had anything to say. It's that I was frankly afraid I wouldn't have the discipline to do it well. You know what I mean? And then I'd say everything that happened in 2020 gave me a now or never, who knows what will happen tomorrow sense of urgency. I finally emailed Professor K, and honestly, our first conversation changed my life. After pitching 3 different concepts, we had a deep exchange about what motivates me to write. And by the end, I realized that not only did I have something of value to say, but the kind of voices I wanted to elevate, specifically those of vulnerable queer immigrant communities of color, were voices that I needed to amplify, especially in the context of all the chaos that was happening around us. So then, I started the program, and I was frankly really surprised by how rigorous this entire process is. And now, I know I'm a pretty good writer already. So I've been a professional creative storyteller for more than 2 decades. In fact, actually about halfway through my manuscript, my mother and I found essays that I wrote when I was in high school. And I realized that I established my, let's call it, lyrical and almost decadent writing style when I was 13. And I like to think I've honed it through 20 years of marketing campaigns and white papers, but it's basically the same voice. Now, what I didn't realize was how much I didn't know about the publishing world, specifically how technology has and hasn't disrupted it, and the level of professionalism that's needed to create these kinds of books and experiences, And I didn't realize how collaborative making a book is. I didn't realize that first of all, I also did not realize that I was a deadline writer that needed to schedule entire blocks of time into the night specifically to meet cutoff times the following afternoon. And throughout all this, I will say I am very thankful for all of the speakers, the coaches, and my author community. But especially as somebody who comes from my kind of perspective, I am most thankful for the fact that as a queer writer who wrote an unapologetically queer book, I was able to work with fellow queer editors who also embodied my lived experience. I absolutely did not expect that. So there was a greater level of comfort, affinity, and most of all, trust that my stories would be honed with sort of very critical and compassionate perspective. And they pushed me not only with deadlines to keep me accountable, but frankly with ideas, suggestions, and concerns that ultimately made my book better. So quick example, when I first pitched my book to Professor K, I had thought it was going to be a chic coffee table book filled with affirming but sassy bon mots and illustrations of suave gay men holding martini glasses saying, "Yes, queen, you got this." But then as I interviewed my fellow Guncles, which by the way means That's what Guncles means. Gay uncles means Guncles. And other queer mentors, my NDP editors and I realized that to adequately convey our insights, I also needed to uncover what made us credible gurus to begin with. That meant diving into our triumphs and our traumas, our dreams, our disappointments, our challenges with families, both biological and chosen. And I had to examine the fullness of our lived queer, transgender, disabled, immigrant, multinational, multilingual experiences. And spotlight all the ways that these are achingly, beautifully, relentlessly human. And frankly, what resulted was something more real, more relevant, more revolutionary, something I'm very, very proud of. And I have the Creator Institute and NDP to thank for it.
What a lovely story that where you're able to bring this, beautiful journey of creativity and some lovely life lessons for yourself and many others, and marry it with the structure and discipline to actually get it done. And I think that's what's so important about, I think, working with a coach. I don't know how I would have written my book without it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. So the Wisdom of Guncles, why did you feel compelled to write this book, and why now, Michael?
Absolutely. So I wrote this book, like many of us in my cohort, at a time when the world was in crisis. And I needed to find not only my voice in response to it, but also what my community had to say in the context of everything that exacerbated what made them vulnerable to begin with. So first, the pandemic revealed the inadequacies of our healthcare system and discriminatory political rhetoric directed violence against Asian Pacific Islanders such as myself. Then the murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement awakened the world to persistent and unexamined racial inequalities and social injustices. And through it all, I found myself having to comfort people in my family and community. Most of all, my biracial nibblings, which is the gender neutral term for nieces and nephews. I'm going to introduce that term to the world, and godchildren, many of whom are female, part Asian, Black, and Latine, and come from immigrant families. And amidst the Black Lives Matter marches and the rise in anti-API hate, I knew that my lived experience as a queer immigrant of color made me uniquely equipped to help my nibblings navigate a world in which all parts of their identity seem to be under attack. See, I, along with the Guncles in my book, have endured many moments in our lives where our identity was in question. In fact, when our human dignity was endangered. And the ways in which we have overcome or continue to deal with insecurities and injustices have all birthed wisdoms, practices, and I would say even cautionary tales that we hope will pave lighter, clearer, different paths for the next generation. And that our ideas are applicable regardless of how our reader identifies. And so the way that I could best ensure that these stories can be truly universal is by carefully curating the voices I chose to represent. So originally, I was going to write my own wisdoms born from my experience. But then I realized that for this to be effective, I needed to bring other voices in. So I purposefully sought a multinational pantheon of very, very diverse Guncles, queeros, that's queer heroes, and mentors who represent stories about immigration, stories about code switching, stories about disability, and stories about exploring gender identity. Of my characters, at least 2/3 are people of color, half escaped political turmoil overseas, a third are transgender or non-binary, and all have very, very complex relationships with biological families that frankly stubbornly held onto beliefs and traditions that cast their black sheep aside. So for example, there's the story of the explorer. Okay, he's a gay disabled wheelchair using African-American academic from Ohio who travels the world to escape the traumas of white supremacy and sexual violence, and ultimately finds his true self and becomes a staunch warrior against ableism. He's also the godfather to a young biracial woman in whom he wants to instill a love for exploration and discovery. And then there's this beautiful story of the Beacon about an engaged couple whose same-sex relationship has become, frankly, their many nibblings' only example of relationship stability. So one comes from a Catholic family in Boston, the other a conservative Christian family in Maryland, from whom they are heartbreakingly estranged. And regardless, what I love about the story is that it really teaches that love is love. And then finally, we have this wondrous, magical story of The Alchemist, a queer non-binary drag artist from Paraguay who suffered their immigrant parents' disappointment that they will never be the golden child. They're an artist who dismantles gender norms by combining feminine and masculine into a new identity. And they created the safe space that they never had to embolden their own nieces to come out. And everyone in my book has struggled to find their way and place in a world that isn't kind to people who fall outside of traditions and norms, right? So but they've all managed to find ways not only to survive, but thrive as their authentic selves. And I truly, truly believe that given all that we've been through, that prompts many people to ponder just what our place and purpose in this world is. My hope is that these real life stories born from, frankly, the kinds of people who aren't always heard can offer new paths to my readers and how to answer those kinds of questions.
I really appreciate your thought around 2020 revealed what was going on in the world. I'm with you. I don't think it caused these problems. I think it revealed them. And I really appreciate your perspective on that. And the fact that you've given a voice to this very diverse group of folks that are now get to be part of your journey. And I love that you found the value in bringing them in to sort of complement the story and messages you want to tell.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. So when you think about this book and folks that are going to read it, what do you think is the key message or lesson you'd really like people to take away from your story?
Well, the title of the book is Wisdom of Guncles, so you best believe there are hard-earned lessons in this book. And while they're woven through every chapter, I created archetypes to anchor these insights, some of which I've just mentioned. And they're all anchored on very, very real, very human lived experiences. One lesson that I start off and is pretty much reflected across the entire book is that Black sheep are critical. See, I start the book with my own story of having to reckon with and ultimately proudly embody my role as the Black sheep of my family. Now, traditionally, Black sheep are people who are dismissed, shunned, and set aside by their families as hidden parts of, let's say, the ancestral tree. And our decisions are to be avoided. We are cautionary tales of what not to be. In many cases, we are a mystery, and our stories are often erased out of shame. But what I want my readers to know is that Black sheep are to be celebrated. Black sheep are disruptors of archaic tradition. We are critical to how families and communities move forward and become more inclusive and innovative. We redefine what it means to be a member of a family. I would say we actually redefine what it means to be a family itself, especially with the rise of chosen families. And above all, we empower people to question and challenge all instances of it's always been that way, right? Because how it's always been done has never led us to progress as a society. Indeed, what I've discovered is that while LGBTQ people might be the quintessential Black sheep of most families, there is a misfit Black sheep in all of us. Many of us are probably not what our parents and families and ancestors expected us to be, and that's okay. Remember that innovators and entrepreneurs are norm breakers by default. And my hope is that the message of celebrating the Black sheep is a way to make this unapologetically queer content universal.
I love this concept of celebrating the Black sheep. That's where innovation and so many great things in history have come from. And boy, if I'm with you on anytime I see things where people say this is how we've always done it, I often think that's where we need to deliver change the most. Right?
Absolutely.
In so many aspects of life. Well, appreciate you bringing this book to the world and such a powerful message and story you have and celebrating so many that have been through a similar journey. Michael, if people want to learn more about you and your book, where might they go?
Absolutely. So I have a website, www.thewisdomofguncles.com. I am also determined to own the hashtag Guncles, hashtag Guncle, and of course, hashtag the Wisdom of Guncles. And me personally, I have michaeldumlao.com, and my Instagram and Facebook handles are all at Michael Dumlao. That's MichaelDumlao.
Michael Dumlao, author of The Wisdom of Guncles, available wherever you buy books online this August, summer 2021. Michael, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really, really fun.